She said she was on Lower East Broadway with 4 flat tires. I realized she was lying and told her it couldn't be true, because it was right next door to Luke Barrow's house. She said she was telling me the truth, and I told her I saw a clip of her and her lover talking to the cops. She told me what the clip was and I sent it to her. Mom couldn't explain to me why she was wearing a sheet. I wasn't expecting her home for a few hours, but you could do me a favor and open the front door, I said. I was getting out of the car when my daughter Amy saw me. She watched me take my suitcase out of the trunk and walk toward her. No sooner had I set my suitcase on the floor than my cell phone rang. It was Dale Allen Britton. I answered it and put it on speaker. Ed, I just served them both at his house, Dale said. Now your wife and her lover are forbidden to come within 500 feet of you and your children. I will notify the Cape Police Department before I return home. Do yourself a favor, don't talk to her at all, Dale added. If she shows up even for clothes, call the police. Got it, and so did my oldest daughter, I said. Thanks, Dale. Amy, go open the garage so I can move Cheryl's car into it, I said. I have to be in Little Rock. That's what we did. Dad, is that why the locksmith came around 6 to change the locks? Asked Amy. Yeah, it was done at the last minute, I said. I got Kathy to order it because it was becoming obvious that it was going to go the way we planned. What brought this on? Asked Amy. The DNA test your grandfather sent to Ancestry.com, I said. They got a match on April. He told me about it at work on Monday. When I contacted the woman, it turns out your mother's boss is her son, who she gave up for adoption when she was 15. Amy, my daughter, lost her temper. I held her tightly until she calmed down. Then we turned off the lights and went into the kitchen to talk quietly. I turned on the tape recorder and let Amy listen to the conversation her mother and I had when we were driving back from Nashville. It was very informative to hear her mother's words from her own mouth. Why does Mom want you to have an affair, Dad? Amy asked. To negate the repercussions of what she did. Should it be found out, I said. It's sad that her assumption led to the truth coming out. There was a quiet knock on the door. Since I wasn't supposed to be home, Amy answered it. It was a police officer who informed us that they had stopped the cab Grace was in, and told her that she would be violating a court order if she drove on. My eldest daughter and I discussed all of this for the rest of the evening. We both agreed that Grace should have been a writer, because she always had a story to tell about her girlhood. I still can't believe Mom had an ongoing affair with the same man for over 16 years, Amy said. Why didn't we see that? That was easy, I said. You kids were young. I was a sales manager who had to travel regularly to different states for meetings every week. Out of trust in us as a couple, I saw no reason not to give your mom my blessing for weekly night outings with the girls. We all trusted her, Amy said. That's what made us blind to what was going on behind the scenes. I sat stunned. If my daughter hadn't said that, I never would have seen it. She was the one who had used our trust in her that had allowed her to go unpunished for so long. Amy saw the tears filling my eyes and said, That's what hurts the most. It's not the cheating or the lying. It's the realization that she used our beliefs about her deliberately as a tool to continue the only relationship that meant anything to her. If your mother did that to someone she claimed to love, I said, imagine what she'll do to us when she starts hating us for what she's going through. Amy got up to make us both a fresh cup of coffee. At that moment, I realized that dawn had already begun. A text notification came to my phone. It's from your mom. She'd like to be able to talk to me as soon as possible, I said. She says that my eldest and I have some family issues that we need to discuss before I return from my trip. How are you going to respond to her? My daughter asked worriedly. Don't worry. Be happy, Luke, and you can still laugh at the big dumbass behind my back. I said as I wrote this. You can still move to St. Louis with Luke Barrow, which was your plan all along. Just not with our kids. Amy looked at me in utter shock. Your mother doesn't need me anymore, I said. My usefulness to her was exhausted. She wanted me to have an affair so she could use it against me in divorce court. She didn't think for a second that after all this time she'd be caught. It must have been very painful for Amy to hear the words I wrote to her mother. Not many people are able to recognize the pure truth about anything. Most will call the one who reveals it all the nasty names they know because the real truth hurts. In time they will accept it. I stood up and took my daughter in my arms as she began to shed tears again. We managed to calm her down before we heard Eric and April stirring. I turned on the TV in the kitchen to channel Cavos 12 to watch the local morning news like I always did. Soon they were having breakfast to start the day. They were surprised to see me at home. We were all surprised to see an image of my wife on the screen. My son turned up the volume out of curiosity. At that moment, I felt sorry for my children because Luke and she were discussing how stupid and dumb I was. Grace said bluntly, "That fool is such a moron and he doesn't notice everything going on around him." Then their mother made a sarcastic remark about me, which made them both burst into laughter. Then the reporter spoke. "I don't think they're laughing anymore," he said. After watching 5 hours of the longtime lover's Facebook behavior live, their plan to set Edward Adams up with a professional prostitute so she would divorce him and take everything he had blew their minds. In the next scene, Dale sues them both. The reporter explained what the lawsuits were for. Alice just ran over to me and sat on my lap sobbing. It was a hell of an unpleasant way for a 16-year-old girl to find out that her father was not her biological father, but her mother's longtime lover. Eric summed it up by saying, "If you're just a piece of shit in your mom's eyes, what does that do to the rest of us?" Once April calmed down, Amy helped me explain what had happened since my mom and I got back from Nashville. I called the school and asked them to release them from school for Friday and Monday to give them time to adjust and deal with their emotions. We were about to start breakfast when April said, "Daddy, the chief of police is coming." That got our attention and we turned up the volume again. It has now been publicly announced that both Grace Adams and Luke Barrow, our current district attorney, are being criminally prosecuted. A task force from across the county is being assembled to investigate. I thought that when a person's behavior becomes public, the masses cannot publicly accept what they do privately. Hypocrisy rules our society every day. After breakfast and cleaning up, I sat my 3 children down at the table. I showed each of them a copy of the letter my father had received. Then I said, "April, my parents are picking you up to take you to meet your biological father's mother. She is dying of cancer and has asked to meet with you. There's a very good reason for that, but I think it's best to have the woman you're meeting with explain it to you. As far as I'm concerned, you are my daughter and always will be. Other than that, if you have any questions, ask your grandparents. Amy, will you help your sister pack for the weekend while I call my parents?" I asked. As soon as the girls left, my son asked, "How do you handle it, Daddy?" "No," I replied. "I find myself in a constant struggle to keep my cool. Remember, son, if this ever happens to you as a father, you have to stay strong for all the other people in your life." With these words, I called my parents and explained where I was. They said they would come as soon as they finished loading the car. They still had an hour before they had to catch their plane. I didn't realize that it was at that moment that my son and I's relationship was forever changed for the better. The 3 of us watched the daughter I had raised leave with my parents to see her biological grandmother for the first time. I prayed above all that everything would go well, and that she would return with the same feelings I had. The DA's office looks like a morgue. Grace Adams went shopping for new clothes after her car was towed and 4 tires replaced. Luke Barrow read the lawsuit filed against him. Although they didn't have a direct DNA sample, they had linked him biologically in such a way that there was no way he could deny his parentage. Now all the staff knew the truth about their relationship and years-long affair. This, and the fact that they had hidden April Adams' true background, was becoming a political nightmare. Under the law, the term fraud was eventually expanded to include the failure to disclose all material facts about a situation. Because of this, Dale filed a civil suit against Grace and against him together. It was looking more and more like they as a couple had been defrauding her husband Ed for years. All the lawyers he had approached said that Ed Adams and Dale Britton would succeed. The same attorneys he had approached so far wanted nothing to do with it. Most of them had already heard what Dale had done the last time he appeared as a defendant. It was noted that most offenses are based on the assumption that a scheme of certain facts will be presented in such a way that they can be challenged. In Dale's case, when he made his arguments in court, most found that by the time he was done, they had no defense. The exposure of their behavior on Facebook and the apparent admission by the 2 that they were trying to destroy an honest man so that together they could seize as much of his estate as possible would have meant little. But because of his position in the community, it became front-page news. Grace had just walked out of a store she had been going to for years because of the quality and uniqueness of the clothes. The last thing she expected was to run into a woman who would ask if she was crazy because she should have known it would end badly. When Grace asked what the woman was talking about, she learned that the woman said she had been a freaking porn star on Facebook for at least 5 hours. She returned to Luke's house around 1 p.m. and found that the company had just finished service. They mistook her for the homeowner and suggested that her husband and her reset all the security codes in the house. It wasn't until they left that she realized she hadn't been asked to confirm with an electronic signature that they were there. She called Luke and asked who wanted to make sure he didn't take the new position in St. Louis. When he asked why, she told him what she had come back for. Then they began to believe that Ed was just protecting himself because they both knew that his new job was a political appointment from the deep state. After making herself some coffee, she sat down at the table and looked over the divorce petition. The first blow was dealt when she learned that it was her words to her husband that had made him suspicious. Her husband was perplexed as to why she was asking him to intentionally hurt and use another human being for her own personal gratification. But it was Mom and Dad Adams who informed him of the DNA match. This allowed him to determine April's true origins and was undeniable proof that she was having an affair. Grace began to realize that Ed must now know that it was her behavior that almost caused their breakup before April was even born. At that moment, she realized that Ed must know that it was still going on. It was Ed who was behind what had happened last night. It was Ed who was revealing the hidden facts of her life. As she took another sip of coffee, the doorbell rang. She stood up, walked to the front door and opened it, finding that it was the neighbor Luke didn't like. "Mr. Primrose," she said, "what can I do for you?" He handed her an envelope of legal documents and said, "Ed, your husband used my apartment as a base of operations for his operations against you and your longtime lover last night. I was happy to let him do it because Luke Barrow got my son the maximum sentence as a first-time offender. I thought you might be interested to know that the information in the envelope I gave you last night will also be delivered by courier to everyone I know on your side of the family this afternoon." Ed asked me to ask if you are laughing at him now. She watched him walk away with the biggest smile on her face. Back in the kitchen, Grace opened the envelope. It was filled with pictures. They began with her letting Luke into the house with her own key. Then she meets him at the door when he comes home. Their sexual foreplay in the living room. The photos left nothing out. Even police officers were captured in them. Ed's team were professionals. The elimination had been so complete that it now felt like he was working with a bunch of cops who wanted revenge on Luke for their own reasons. But it was the last printed page, signed by her husband, that said it all. If it became public, there would be a whole host of problems they weren't prepared for. Her plans to force her husband to submit to her wishes had fallen to pieces. The question now was how to minimize the damage done by Ed, turning this into a public spectacle. "Grace, last Sunday when we got home from Nashville, I realized that you were trying to set me up to divorce me. Since then, I confess, I've been trying to figure out what I did to make your love for me turn to pure hatred. Now I know why. I see that you blame me for what you think was missing in your life when we only had 2 children. I think you felt trapped in your marriage and wanted your carefree bachelor life back. Otherwise, you wouldn't have turned to him to rediscover the single life. By doing so, you allowed him to take you away from what you hated for a few hours a week. I know that the only reason you stayed married to a man you hated and thought was dead was because Luke didn't want to take on the responsibility of raising children, even his own. With your opinion of me, there's no way you'd leave them alone with a piece of shit like me. Your pride wouldn't have allowed it. As a result, you've lived a lifetime of deliberate lies. Every day you both got away with it and your contempt for who and what I am grew. In your eyes, I became more and more of a fool and an idiot. How many times have you and Luke laughed at this unrepentant bastard? Did you inspire him to make love to you by humiliating or ridiculing me? What I can't forgive or forget is what you and the one you consider your real husband sent to our children because it will affect them for the rest of their lives. I can't understand how Luke and you had fun playing with me and our children's lives as if we were just chess pieces on a game board. News reporter Kivas12 summed it up well when he asked you two if you were laughing at Grace Adams' husband Edward Adams right now. I watched Amy, Eric and April as you and your lover, thanks to the media, flaunted what you planned to do to me. It was horrible watching our children as you joked and laughed about how easy it would be to take down this stupid goon. Eric, our only son, said, "If our mother thinks you're just a piece of shit that needs to be allowed to dry before hammering you into the ground, what does she really think of us?" I have not asked them what your relationship with them will be in the future. At this point, I can honestly say they don't exist. It was your and your lover Luke's utter disgust and contempt for me that led to this. At least we both know you're laughing with joy because you've left me with a reputation as a hapless goofball for the rest of my life. Perhaps tonight you can both raise a glass to victory." Eddie Grace's hands trembled so violently that she dropped the paper. She looked like an angry, bitter, hateful, and cruel bitch. It was obvious that she appeared to her readers as a mother who didn't care about her children, her husband, or any other human being. The only thing she cared about was herself and the fulfillment of her carnal needs. Then her sobs broke the silence in the room. Edie was the only person she knew capable of destroying a person's credibility without directly condemning them. Everyone who read her couldn't argue with his comments about their behavior. In his eyes, everything she'd ever done was about prolonging life, not love. He should have known that Luke was the one pressuring her to leave him and the kids before April got pregnant. It was Luke's new job that made them change their long-term plans. Originally, they were going to wait until April graduated from high school. Then her true origins could be revealed without any repercussions. He was right about something because she wasn't laughing right now. He didn't fail to point out that their own behavior proved his point. Edie believed that their contempt for who and what he was explained their attempt to destroy him completely. It was a declaration of war. If he was going to go down, he was going to take them both with him. Grace picked up the divorce petition and continued reading. It was truly crushing. One of the lawsuits against them was for fraud because they had concealed April's true origins. She was accused of emotional and mental abandonment, adultery, and defamation. But when she looked at the amount they were demanding for damages in the fraud case, she felt sick to her stomach. If he won, both Luke and she would be penniless for a very long time. Ed and his lawyer argued that they could no longer treat Ed as the jackass they thought he was. Saturday was crazy for me and my two older kids. From early morning until 4 in the afternoon, we had family visiting us. Grace's parents, her two brothers, one sister, and their spouses came to support us. Everyone brought one of their favorite dishes so we would have something to eat. Even my brother and sister came from out of town to check on me. The three of us were overwhelmed with love and support. Each of the people who came had a hard time understanding how they could have been deceived by Grace for so long. They all agreed that what appeared on social media was proof that she was trying to destroy me out of hate. My father-in-law and I grabbed a cold beer and went out on the back patio for a few minutes. "Edward, let him go," he said. "Cora's in the house so you can have some privacy and we'll keep them away until you calm down." He stayed with me until things sorted themselves out. "Cora and I plan to change our will," he said. "What should have been Grace's will be divided among your 3 children. She may be our daughter, but I'll never forgive her for what she's become." We had just finished clearing out the house when my dad called. "April met this lady," my father said. "You can definitely see some family resemblance. Their meeting went well. Mrs. Smith seemed interested in your family's situation and got April to openly tell her how she felt about it. That was good to see because she had been keeping things to herself. The lawyer got the blood sample he needed and then invited me in for a private conversation," my father said. "He asked me about Luke Barrow and I told him what we all knew. I learned that his real father was in prison for life for killing his mistress's husband. Luke would have been left his real mother's inheritance if April hadn't come into her life." "Don't worry, Dad," I replied. "Dale Britton got a court order banning him from being within 500 feet of either of us." It was a busy day with many family members from both sides coming to offer their support. We were lodged at Mrs. Smith's estate as her guests. "Your mother felt honored to be treated so regally," Dad explained. "April is staying with Mrs. Smith now. We both like her. Her lawyer said he hasn't seen a smile on the grand old lady's face in a long time. Hold on, I'll put your mom on the phone." Ed, I got a chance to talk to Beatrice alone for a bit. She asked me what kind of son you were and I talked about your life in general, trying to be as frank and honest as I could. We talked in great detail about what had happened over the past week. She told me that you left it up to her to tell April why she wanted to see her. She said it had been a long time since a stranger had shown her such respect, and then thanked all of us for telling her how to handle her estate situation. My mom continued. She plans to leave everything in a trust in April's name for you to manage until she turns 25. Text me when you leave so I can be there when you bring her home, I asked before hanging up. I texted April to say we all miss you and send hi to Dad. We finally had time to get everything in order before David and Cheryl arrived in my car. I had to apologize to her for forgetting to return it. The police chief sees a chance to take out Luke Barrow, Cheryl said. He and Dale are working together. Dale has handed him some questionable items for the investigators to look into. When I got back, all the staff were gloomy and upset, David says. I told them in general terms that some of us had been aware of what was going on for most of the week and had helped in any way we could. It's been an emotional roller coaster around here since Thursday night, I said. The kids still have a hard time dealing with it at times, so I'm taking Monday off too. Have you heard anything about Grace? Cheryl asked. Not since Thursday night, I replied. Luke and her are probably busy doing their own thing since they've made it publicly clear how they feel about us. My youngest daughter called me early Sunday morning and asked if she and her grandparents could come home late on Monday. I gave my blessing if her grandparents would agree. She thanked me for making her go. I asked why. April said that Mrs. Smith made me accept the fact that it was not my fault that her mother's infidelity had brought me into the world. Mrs. Smith made Daddy understand that we were all innocent victims and didn't deserve what her son's and my mother's behavior had brought upon us. I love you, Daddy, she said before ending the conversation. On Monday night, Amy, Eric, and I watched my mom and dad pull into our driveway. My parents looked stressed and tired. As soon as she got out of the car, she immediately rushed into my arms. I had to admit it was nice to have my youngest daughter home. Her father opened the trunk and brought in her suitcase.